Hey everyone, welcome to Stories for Sleep. Hey there, dreamers. Are you ready for a night of relaxation and mystery? Dive into our world of enchanting tales, where the whispers of the past come alive and every story brings you closer to peaceful slumber. If you're enjoying our magical journey, don't forget to like this video, share it with your fellow night owls, and subscribe so you never miss a new adventure. Let's make every night unforgettable. On a misty evening, Emma arrived at Ravenwood Manor, her late uncle's mysterious estate. The ancient mansion stood at the edge of a dense forest, its towering spires disappearing into the fog. Stories of strange occurrences and unexplainable shadows had surrounded the manor for years, but Emma dismissed them as local legends. As she stepped inside, the creaking door echoed through the grand, dusty hall. The air smelled of damp wood, and the flickering chandelier above cast strange shapes on the walls, as if the shadows themselves were alive. Emma explored the house, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She felt a cold breeze despite the windows being shut. Suddenly, she noticed a portrait of a man with piercing eyes on the wall. Beneath it, an inscription read, "The Keeper watches all." A chill ran down her spine. In the corner of her eye, she thought she saw a shadow move. Turning quickly, she found nothing. Yet, the feeling of being watched lingered, making her question if she was truly alone in the house. That night, Emma struggled to sleep in the unfamiliar bedroom. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the occasional rustling of the trees outside. As the clock struck midnight, a faint whisper reached her ears. It was soft, almost like a sigh, but it sent shivers down her spine. She sat up, scanning the room, but nothing seemed out of place. The candle she had left burning flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Deciding to investigate, Emma tiptoed into the hallway, holding a flashlight tightly. The whispers grew louder, as if leading her somewhere. She followed the sound to the library, where the air felt colder. A shadow darted across the room, startling her. Gathering her courage, she stepped closer to the old bookshelves and found a strange book lying open on the floor. Its pages were blank, except for one phrase written in bold, "He sees you." The next day, Emma decided to explore the manor further in daylight, hoping it would feel less sinister. She discovered a locked door in the basement that refused to budge, no matter how hard she tried. Curious, she searched the house for a key, but found nothing. Strangely, every time she passed the door, she felt an icy chill and heard faint scratching sounds coming from the other side. That evening, Emma dreamed of the locked door. In her dream, it swung open to reveal a dark figure standing in the shadows, its glowing eyes fixed on her. She woke up with a start, her heart pounding. Determined to uncover the truth, she knew the locked door held answers to the manor's secrets. But fear began to creep into her mind. What if opening it unleashed something far worse? Emma found an old journal hidden in a drawer the next morning. The journal belonged to her uncle and detailed strange events at Ravenwood Manor. One entry read, "The Keeper guards the shadows. Disturb him, and you'll never escape." As Emma read further, she discovered that the Keeper was believed to be a spirit bound to the house, ensuring no one uncovered its dark past. Her uncle had written about seeing shadows moving at night and hearing whispers that spoke his name. That night, Emma felt a presence in her room. She dared not look, but out of the corner of her eye, she saw a shadow standing still in the corner. A deep voice echoed through the room, "Leave the manor, or you'll never leave at all." Oh, Emma froze, her heart pounding. Was this the Keeper? She knew she had to decide whether to obey the warning or uncover the truth behind the shadows. Unable to leave without answers, Emma returned to the locked door with newfound determination. She found an old iron key under the floorboard, as if the house itself wanted her to uncover its secret. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the door. Inside, she discovered a small, dark room filled with strange symbols and a mirror covered with a black cloth. As Emma removed the cloth, the mirror revealed not her reflection, but the figure of the keeper standing behind her. "You should not have come here," the keeper said in a low, growling voice. Emma begged for answers, and the keeper revealed the truth. Her uncle had made a pact with the shadows to gain power, binding the keeper to the manor forever. Now Emma had to decide, would she leave and let the shadows remain, or try to break the curse, risking her own life in the process? Emma stood frozen as the keeper's glowing eyes bore into hers through the mirror. "Your uncle sealed his fate, and now you tread the same path," the keeper said, its voice echoing like thunder. Emma's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of her uncle's journal. The pact had cursed him, binding the keeper to guard the house and its secrets. Despite her fear, Emma couldn't turn back now. "There must be a way to end this," she whispered. The keeper seemed to hesitate, then pointed toward a hidden compartment in the room. Inside, Emma found an ancient amulet and a scroll. The scroll detailed a ritual to break the curse, but it came with a chilling warning: breaking the bond will come at a great cost. Emma's discovery came with consequences. That night, the shadows became more aggressive, their whispers louder, more menacing. Every corner of the manor seemed alive with unseen eyes watching her every move. The walls creaked as if something heavy moved within them. In the dead of night, Emma heard footsteps outside her door. Gathering her courage, she opened it, only to find the hallway empty. Suddenly, a shadow lunged at her, its icy touch freezing her in place. "Leave now," it hissed before vanishing into the darkness. Emma clutched the amulet, realizing it was her only protection against the shadows. The next morning, Emma decided to confront the keeper. Returning to the mirror, she called out, "If you want me to leave, then tell me how to free you." The keeper appeared again, its expression grim. "The pact binds me here, but destroying the amulet will sever the bond," it explained. Emma felt a pang of guilt as the keeper revealed its torment. Bound for decades, it had lost all humanity. Yet destroying the amulet could unleash the shadows, putting the world at risk. Emma faced an impossible choice: free the keeper and risk the shadows escaping, or leave and let the curse continue. Determined to free the keeper, Emma prepared for the ritual. The scroll instructed her to perform it in the heart of the forest behind the manor. At midnight, under the pale moonlight, Emma carried the amulet and scroll to the clearing. The forest was eerily silent, as if holding its breath. As she began the ritual, the shadows grew restless, swirling around her like a storm. The keeper appeared, its voice trembling: "You must not fail, or they will consume everything." Emma's hands shook as she chanted the ancient words. The amulet glowed, and the shadows screamed in fury, trying to snatch it from her grip. The ritual reached its climax as the amulet shattered, releasing a blinding light. The shadows howled in agony, their forms dissolving into the air. The keeper, no longer bound, began to transform. Its monstrous form faded, revealing a man: Emma's uncle. "I'm sorry, Emma," he said, his voice weak. "I thought I could control them. But they controlled me." He explained how greed had led him to make the pact, unaware of the price he would pay. With the curse broken, he could finally rest, but the cost of freeing him was still unknown. As dawn broke, the manor felt lighter, as if the darkness had lifted. Yet, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. She explored the house, now eerily quiet. The shadows were gone, but their memory lingered in the cold, empty halls. While she had freed the keeper, the price of the ritual became clear. Emma noticed her reflection in the shattered mirror. It flickered, her image blending with the shadows. The curse had not disappeared entirely, it had marked her. She realized that the shadows would follow her wherever she went. Unable to leave the manor, Emma accepted her fate as the new keeper of Ravenwood. She locked the doors, sealing the secrets within. The shadows were no longer hostile but remained tethered to her, waiting silently in the corners of the house. Over time, visitors to the village spoke of Ravenwood Manor, claiming to see a lone figure in the windows, watching silently. Emma had become a part of the manor's legend, a warning to those who dared seek its secrets. The curse had not ended, it had only passed to her, ensuring Ravenwood's dark story would never be forgotten. Days turned into weeks, and Emma adjusted to her new reality as the keeper of Ravenwood Manor. The shadows were no longer hostile, but they lingered, always watching her from the corners of every room. At night, their whispers became louder, speaking in cryptic words she couldn't understand. Emma spent her time exploring the manor, uncovering hidden rooms and forgotten relics. One evening, she stumbled upon an old diary belonging to her uncle. The last entry read, "The keeper is both the guardian and the prisoner. To protect the world, I must embrace the darkness." Emma realized that the role she now held came with responsibilities she didn't yet comprehend. As Emma roamed the manor, she discovered a door she had never noticed before. Unlike the others, it was adorned with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. A sense of dread washed over her, but she felt drawn to it. With trembling hands, she pushed it open, revealing a room filled with mirrors. Each mirror reflected not just her image, but different versions of herself, some frightened, others powerful, and one that seemed consumed by shadow. The whispers around her grew louder, almost urging her to choose a reflection. "What is this place?" she murmured. The shadows didn't answer, but she felt their presence growing stronger. That night, the shadows became restless, swirling around Emma as if trying to communicate. In a moment of courage, she addressed them directly. "What do you want from me?" she asked. One shadow, larger than the rest, stepped forward, its form taking on a vaguely human shape. "You are the keeper, but you do not yet understand your role," it said, its voice echoing in her mind. "There is a force beyond this manor, a darkness that seeks to escape. You must guard the gates to ensure it remains sealed." Emma's heart raced as she realized the curse was more than just about the manor, it was about protecting the world from a greater evil. The days grew darker, and the whispers became warnings. Emma sensed an approaching danger, as if the shadows were preparing for something. The forest around the manor seemed alive, the trees twisting and creaking as though they were watching her. Even the villagers began to notice strange occurrences, reporting sightings of shadowy figures near their homes. Emma knew she had to act. She returned to the forbidden room, hoping to find answers in the mirrors. This time, the reflection spoke to her. "The darkness will test you. If you fail, it will consume everything," one reflection said. Emma realized that the manor wasn't just a prison, it was a battleground, and she was at the center of it. One stormy night, the shadows led Emma to the basement, where the sealed door now glowed with an eerie light. "The time has come," the shadows whispered. Emma opened the door and found herself in a vast, dark chamber filled with swirling mist. At the center stood an ancient pedestal with a glowing orb. As she approached, a figure emerged from the mist. It was the dark force the shadows had warned her about, a being of pure malice and chaos. "You are unworthy to be the keeper," it growled. The being attacked, and Emma was forced to defend herself, using the amulet's fragments and the knowledge she had gained. The battle was fierce, testing her courage and willpower. With a final burst of strength, Emma shattered the glowing orb on the pedestal, releasing a blinding light that engulfed the chamber. The dark force howled as it was pulled back into the shadows, its power sealed once more. The chamber fell silent, and the shadows around Emma seemed to bow, acknowledging her as their true keeper. Exhausted but victorious, Emma returned to the manor, knowing her role was far from over. The shadows no longer whispered warnings but spoke words of guidance. Emma had embraced her destiny, becoming the protector of Ravenwood Manor and the gatekeeper of the darkness it held. From that night on, she vowed to guard the world from the evil lurking in the shadows, even if it meant sacrificing her freedom forever. Weeks passed, and Emma began to settle into her role as the keeper. The shadows no longer seemed hostile, and she felt a strange connection to them. But one night, a chilling wind swept through the manor, and the shadows began to stir uneasily. The whispers returned, louder and more urgent than ever before. "They are coming," the shadows hissed. Emma felt a wave of dread wash over her. Through the manor's tall windows, she saw figures moving in the forest. They weren't shadows, but human strangers carrying lanterns and tools. The villagers had decided to investigate the manor, drawn by the strange stories surrounding it. The group of villagers entered the manor, their footsteps echoing in the vast halls. They carried weapons and chanted prayers, determined to cleanse what they believed was a cursed place. Emma watched from the shadows, her heart racing. She knew they had no idea what they were dealing with. The shadows began to react, swirling and creeping closer to the intruders. Emma stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You need to leave," she shouted. The villagers turned to her, startled. "This place is dangerous. You don't understand what you're doing," but her warnings only made them more determined. They thought she was part of the curse. As the villagers moved deeper into the manor, the shadows grew more agitated. They began to lash out, extinguishing lanterns and trapping the intruders in pockets of darkness. The air filled with panicked screams as the villagers tried to fight back. Emma begged the shadows to stop, but they refused to listen. One man managed to light a torch and threw it at a curtain, setting it ablaze. The fire spread quickly, and the shadows recoiled in fear. Emma rushed to extinguish the flames, realizing that the intruders were endangering not just themselves but the entire manor. "You need to leave now, or none of us will survive," she yelled. Realizing the danger, the villagers began to retreat, but the shadows weren't ready to let them go. They formed a wall of darkness, blocking the exit. Emma stood between them, pleading with the shadows. "Let them leave." "They don't understand what they've done," she said. Slowly, the shadows parted, allowing the villagers to escape. As the last intruder fled into the forest, Emma collapsed to the ground, exhausted. The shadows surrounded her, their whispers softer now. "You are their keeper, but your power has limits," they said. Emma realized that her role wasn't just to guard the manor, it was to protect the balance between the living and the shadows. After the ordeal, Emma returned to the Forbidden Room, seeking answers. This time, the mirrors reflected not her image, but scenes from the past. She saw her uncle making the pact, his greed blinding him to the consequences. She saw the keeper before him, a woman who had tried and failed to break the curse. One reflection showed Emma's future. She stood alone in the manor, older and weary, the shadows her only companions. "Is this my fate?" she asked aloud. The shadows whispered, "Your choices will shape your destiny, but the darkness will always demand a keeper." Emma felt the weight of her role more than ever. As dawn broke, Emma stood at the manor's entrance, watching the sun rise over the forest. The villagers would never return, but the story of Ravenwood Manor would spread, drawing new seekers of its mysteries. Emma knew she couldn't stop them, but she could prepare for what lay ahead. She returned to the library, determined to learn everything about the curse and its origins. The shadows watched silently, their presence now a source of comfort rather than fear. Emma had accepted her fate not as a prisoner of the manor, but as its guardian. With each passing day, she grew stronger, ready to face whatever darkness the future might bring. Months passed, and Emma felt the manor grow quieter, as if the shadows were resting. But one night, the stillness broke. The wind howled through the halls, and the shadows surged, forming shapes she had never seen before. They whispered in unison, their voices trembling with urgency. "They are awakening," they warned. Emma's chest tightened as she realized they spoke of something far more dangerous than the villagers or the darkness she had encountered before. Deep beneath the manor, an ancient seal pulsed with faint light. Emma knew the time was nearing when the shadow's greatest threat would rise. Determined to understand the shadow's warning, Emma searched the library for answers. Hidden among the dusty tomes, she found a map of the manor that revealed a secret crypt beneath the basement. With a lantern in hand, she descended into the cold, damp depths. The crypt was vast, its walls lined with carvings of shadowy figures and strange symbols. At the center was a massive stone slab, its surface cracked and glowing faintly. Emma could feel the energy radiating from it, and the shadows swirled around her, their whispers barely audible. "This is where it began," they said. As Emma studied the cracked slab, a loud rumble echoed through the crypt. The ground shook, and the slab began to split open. A figure emerged, tall and cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing like embers. The shadows recoiled, murmuring, "The Shadow King has returned." Emma stood her ground, clutching the amulet she now wore around her neck. "I am the keeper," she said firmly. The Shadow King tilted his head, his voice deep and chilling. "You are but a child playing with powers you cannot control," he said. "The shadows belong to me, and so does this manor." The Shadow King moved through the crypt with an air of dominance, his presence overwhelming. "You cannot hold this power alone," he said. "Join me, and together we will rule the shadows." Emma felt a flicker of temptation, but shook her head. "I will never let you take this place," she said. The Shadow King laughed, and the crypt darkened further. "Then you will face the consequences," he said. He unleashed a wave of darkness that surged toward Emma. Using the amulet, she created a shield of light, pushing back the darkness. The crypt trembled as their powers clashed, each trying to overpower the other. The battle raged on, with Emma using every ounce of strength to hold her ground. The Shadow King's power was immense, and the shadows around her seemed torn, unsure of which side to take. "You are their keeper," Emma shouted to the shadows. "Stand with me, or everything will be lost." The shadows hesitated, then began to merge with Emma's light. Together they pushed back against the Shadow King, their combined power creating a brilliant glow that filled the crypt. The Shadow King roared in anger, his form beginning to waver. "This is not the end," he bellowed before vanishing into the darkness. With the Shadow King defeated, the crypt fell silent. The slab sealed itself once more, and the glow faded. Emma stood in the center, her heart pounding. The shadows swirled around her, their whispers calm and reassuring. "You have proven yourself," they said. "You are the true keeper of Ravenwood Manor." As Emma ascended from the crypt, she felt a sense of peace for the first time. The shadows now obeyed her completely, their loyalty unwavering. She knew her role as keeper would never end, but she also knew she was no longer alone. The manor and its secrets were hers to protect, and she was ready to face whatever the future held. Years passed, and Ravenwood Manor stood untouched by outsiders. Emma had grown into her role as the keeper, and the shadows seemed at peace. The whispers were softer, their voices more like companions than warnings. Yet Emma often felt the weight of her solitude. One evening, as the sun set behind the forest, Emma noticed something strange. The shadows moved with an energy she hadn't seen in years. They whispered her name repeatedly, but not in fear or urgency. "Emma," they called. "Someone is coming." A chill ran down her spine. Who would dare approach the manor now? At midnight, Emma stood at the manor's grand entrance, waiting. A figure appeared through the mist, carrying a lantern. It was a young man, his face familiar yet unrecognizable. "I've heard the stories," he said as he stepped closer. "I need to speak with the keeper." Emma studied him carefully, unsure of his intentions. "You should leave," she warned. "This place is not safe for outsiders." But the man shook his head. "I'm not just anyone," he replied. "My name is Edward, and I'm your brother." Emma gasped, her mind racing. She thought she was the last of her family. Inside the manor, Edward shared his story. He had grown up far from Ravenwood, unaware of its dark legacy. Their father, before vanishing, had left behind cryptic letters about the manor's curse and the keeper's role. "I didn't believe it," Edward said, "until I felt drawn here, as if something was calling me." Emma listened in disbelief. The shadows confirmed his words, whispering, "He is of your blood." Yet Emma couldn't shake her unease. Why had Edward come now, after so many years? And what would his arrival mean for the delicate balance she had worked so hard to maintain? The shadows seemed intrigued by Edward, swirling around him curiously. But their whispers carried a warning he must prove his worth. Emma didn't fully understand, but the shadows guided her to the forbidden room. "Show him the mirrors," they urged. Edward stood before the mirrors, his reflection shifting and changing. He saw glimpses of the past, including the pact their uncle had made. Then the image changed to show Edward standing in darkness, a crown of shadows on his head. Emma gasped, but Edward seemed unfazed. "I was meant to be here," he said confidently. That night, the manor trembled as an icy wind swept through its halls. The shadows grew restless, and Emma knew something was wrong. In the crypt, the cracked slab began to glow again, and the Shadow King's voice echoed through the manor. "Did you think I was defeated?" he boomed. Emma and Edward raced to the crypt. The Shadow King emerged, his form darker and more menacing than before. "Your bloodline cannot save you," he sneered. "This time I will take everything." Emma clutched the amulet tightly, but the Shadow King's power seemed stronger than ever. Edward stepped forward, surprising Emma. "If he's after our bloodline, then we fight together," he said. The shadows seemed to agree, surrounding both siblings with a protective aura. The Shadow King laughed, his voice reverberating through the crypt. "You are nothing against me." Together, Emma and Edward channeled their combined energy, using the amulet and the shadow's power. The crypt glowed with light and darkness entwined, creating a force that pushed back against the Shadow King. For the first time, he hesitated, his form flickering like a dying flame. The battle raged on, shaking the manor to its foundation. The Shadow King unleashed waves of darkness, but Emma and Edward countered with light. The shadows joined the fight, turning against their former master. "You are not welcome here," Emma shouted. The Shadow King let out a roar, his form disintegrating under the combined power of the siblings and the shadows. "This is not the end," he bellowed as he faded into nothingness. The crypt fell silent, and the slab sealed itself permanently. Emma and Edward collapsed, exhausted but victorious. The shadows surrounded the siblings, their whispers soft and reverent. "You have restored balance," they said. "The Shadow King will not return." Emma felt a sense of relief wash over her, but she also knew their journey wasn't over. The shadows now looked to Edward as well. "You are both keepers now," they said. Edward nodded, accepting his role without hesitation. Together they vowed to protect the manor and its secrets, ensuring that the darkness would never threaten the outside world again. The shadows seemed at peace, their energy calmer than ever before. With the Shadow King gone, the siblings worked to restore the manor. The cracks in the walls began to heal, and the once haunting atmosphere grew warmer. Emma and Edward explored parts of the manor they had never seen before, uncovering hidden rooms and forgotten treasures. The shadows became their allies, helping them understand the manor's mysteries. Emma no longer felt alone, and Edward found a purpose he had never known. Together they began to rebuild Ravenwood, not just as a fortress of shadows, but as a sanctuary for its strange and magical legacy. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the manor's tall windows, Emma and Edward stood side by side. Ravenwood Manor no longer felt like a place of fear, but one of strength and unity. The shadows whispered their gratitude, promising to remain loyal to their keepers. Emma smiled, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. The curse of Ravenwood had been broken, and its legacy now rested in capable hands. For the first time in centuries, the manor stood as a beacon of hope, its secrets guarded by the last of the Ravenwood bloodline. With the manor restored and peace seemingly returned, Emma and Edward settled into their roles as keepers. The shadows were calm and cooperative, their whispers now guiding rather than warning. But one evening, the shadows began to hum with unease. "Something stirs beyond the forest," they whispered. Emma frowned, sensing the familiar tinge of danger. Edward tried to reassure her. "We defeated the Shadow King. Nothing can harm us now." Yet the shadows' warnings grew louder. "Not all darkness stays defeated," they said, their voices trembling. The siblings decided to investigate the forest beyond the manor's grounds, a place neither had dared to venture before. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and even the shadows hesitated to follow. "The woods remember," they warned. "Do not wake what sleeps." As Emma and Edward ventured deeper, they found strange carvings on the trees and the remnants of rituals long forgotten. Suddenly, a low growl echoed around them. Emma gripped the amulet tightly, while Edward raised his lantern. "We're not alone," he whispered. The growling grew louder, and out of the shadows emerged a monstrous figure. Its eyes glowed red, and its body was shrouded in black mist. The creature lunged at them, but the amulet's light pushed it back. "What is that thing?" Edward shouted. Fear creeping into his voice, the shadows surrounded the siblings protectively, whispering, "It is an ancient guardian, bound to the woods. It awakens when balance is threatened." Emma's mind raced. If the Shadow King was gone, what had disturbed the forest enough to awaken this creature? The shadows guided them deeper into the forest, where they stumbled upon a crumbling altar. At its center was an artifact, a stone carved with symbols that glowed faintly. The shadows whispered, "This was taken from the manor long ago. Its power is tied to the forest." Emma reached for the stone, but the creature lunged again, blocking her path. Edward threw the lantern at the creature, momentarily distracting it. "Take it now," he yelled. Emma grabbed the artifact, and a surge of energy coursed through her. The forest seemed to tremble in response. As Emma held the artifact, the shadows surrounded her, their whispers growing louder. "You are now bonded to both the manor and the forest," they said. Edward helped her to her feet, his face filled with concern. "What does that mean?" he asked. The shadows explained that the artifact had been a key to maintaining balance. Without it, the forest's guardian had turned feral. Now that the artifact was reclaimed, the guardian would obey Emma, but only if she proved herself worthy. "Another test," she murmured, bracing herself for what was to come. The forest guardian circled them, its glowing eyes fixed on Emma. "You must face it," the shadows urged. "Show it you are worthy of the Keeper's legacy." Emma stepped forward, her heart pounding. Edward tried to stop her, but she shook her head. "This is my role now." The creature roared, charging at her. Emma held up the artifact, channeling its energy. The amulet glowed brightly, and the two forces collided in a burst of light and shadow. Emma stood her ground, focusing all her strength on calming the guardian. Slowly, its growls turned to low rumbles, and it knelt before her. The forest guardian circled them, its glowing eyes fixed on Emma. "You must face it," the shadows urged. "Show it you are worthy of the Keeper's legacy." Emma stepped forward, her heart pounding. Edward tried to stop her, but she shook her head. "This is my role now." The creature roared, charging at her. Emma held up the artifact, channeling its energy. The amulet glowed brightly, and the two forces collided in a burst of light and shadow. Emma stood her ground, focusing all her strength on calming the guardian. Slowly, its growls turned to low rumbles, and it knelt before her. The guardian's submission marked Emma as the rightful keeper of both the manor and the forest. The shadows whispered in approval, their voices blending with the wind. "You have restored balance," they said. Edward stepped forward, relief washing over him. "You did it," he said, smiling. But Emma knew their responsibilities had grown. "The forest is as much a part of Ravenwood's legacy as the manor," she said. "We must protect both." Edward nodded, ready to stand by her side. The shadows seemed content, their whispers growing softer. With the artifact restored, the guardian became a loyal ally. It patrolled the forest, ensuring no threats would approach the manor. Emma and Edward worked to strengthen the bond between the forest and the shadows, uncovering more secrets about Ravenwood's ancient history. They learned of a time when the forest and manor had worked in harmony, guarded by their ancestors. "This is our chance to rebuild that unity," Edward said. Emma agreed, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The manor and forest were no longer places of fear, but of strength and resilience. Word of Ravenwood's transformation spread quietly among the nearby villages. Though most still feared the manor, a few brave souls began to visit, seeking Emma and Edward's wisdom. The siblings shared only what was necessary, careful to protect the manor's secrets. The shadows approved of their discretion, whispering, "The legacy must remain protected." Emma often stood on the manor's balcony, watching the forest guardian roam. She felt a deep connection to both the light and the shadows, understanding that balance was the key to Ravenwood's survival. As the years passed, Emma and Edward grew into their roles as dual keepers. The shadows remained their steadfast allies, and the forest guardian became a symbol of Ravenwood's enduring strength. The siblings ensured that the balance between light and shadow was never broken again. On the night of the manor's anniversary, the shadows whispered a final promise. "We are bound to you, and you to us, for as long as the legacy endures." Emma and Edward stood together, their bond unbreakable. Under the moonlight, Ravenwood Manor stood proud, a sanctuary, a mystery, and a testament to the power of unity. As the years went by, Emma and Edward found that Ravenwood Manor held more secrets than they had ever imagined. One stormy night, while exploring the manor's deepest corners, they uncovered a hidden door beneath the grand staircase. The door was covered in intricate carvings and sealed with a strange, glowing symbol. "This wasn't here before," Emma whispered, brushing her fingers over the carvings. Edward's eyes narrowed. "There's something ancient about this." Together they activated the hidden mechanism, and the door slowly creaked open, revealing a spiral staircase leading down into darkness. They descended into the depths of the manor, the air growing colder with every step. The staircase led to a vast underground library, its shelves lined with dusty tomes and ancient scrolls. The room smelled of old paper and magic. "This place must be centuries old," Edward said, his voice echoing in the silence. Emma's fingers hovered over the books, sensing the weight of forgotten knowledge. "These are the true secrets of Ravenwood," she murmured. As they explored, they found a book bound in shadowy leather, its cover embossed with the same symbol as the door. "This is it," Emma said, carefully opening it. The book contained writings that were both fascinating and terrifying. It spoke of Ravenwood's origins, how the manor was built atop a powerful ley line, and how its guardians were chosen from those able to control both light and shadow. The shadows in the room seemed to react to the book, swirling around them in a quiet dance. One page, however, caught Emma's eye. It described a forbidden spell that could merge the realms of light and shadow, a spell that could destroy or protect the entire manor. Edward's hand brushed over the page, but the shadows whispered, "Do not awaken that power." Emma hesitated. The temptation was strong, but she knew the consequences could be dire. As they continued to explore the underground library, they noticed a dark presence growing stronger. The shadows around them began to twist, their whispers turning frantic. The spell must never be used, they warned, their voices trembling with fear. Emma's grip tightened on the book. "But why was it hidden here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind slammed the library door shut, and the shadows formed into a spectral figure shrouded in darkness. "I am the one who sealed this spell away," the figure hissed, its eyes glowing a sickly green. "You have awoken the power of the old world, and now you must face the consequences." The spectral figure floated closer, its presence suffocating the air around them. Emma's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "Who are you?" she demanded. The figure's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "I am the guardian of the forbidden spell," it declared. "The one who was tasked with keeping it from those unworthy." Edward stepped forward, holding out his lantern to push back the darkness. "We seek only knowledge," he said firmly. The specter's laughter echoed through the library. "Then prove it. If you are worthy of Ravenwood's legacy, you must pass my test." The shadows swirled violently, and the room seemed to pulse with energy. The figure gestured toward the center of the library, where a glowing rune had appeared on the floor. "Step onto the rune," the figure commanded. Emma exchanged a glance with Edward, and together they stepped onto the glowing symbol. The moment they did, the room plunged into darkness. In the pitch-black void, the shadows began to form images, visions of Ravenwood's past, of battles fought, of sacrifices made. The whispers grew louder, their words becoming indistinct. "You must face your fears," the specter's voice echoed. "Only then can you unlock the power of the spell." Emma closed her eyes, drawing strength from the shadows she had come to trust. Suddenly, Emma was transported into a vision. She saw herself standing before the Shadow King, her greatest fear. The king's dark eyes glowed, and his mocking voice filled her mind. "You think you can control the shadows?" He sneered. "You are nothing." Emma's heart pounded, but she refused to back down. "I am the keeper," she said, her voice steady. "And I will not let you control me." The shadows around her responded, swirling protectively. Slowly, the image of the Shadow King began to fade, replaced by a sense of peace. Emma had conquered her fear. Edward, too, was forced to face his own demons. He found himself in a dark forest, alone and vulnerable. A figure appeared in the distance, his younger self, abandoned and afraid. "You failed me," the younger Edward said, his voice echoing through the forest. Edward's heart ached, but he stepped forward, facing the vision. "I wasn't perfect, but I did my best," he replied. The vision of his younger self smiled sadly and disappeared. The forest faded, and Edward found himself back in the library. The shadows had tested both of them, and they had passed. The spectral figure reappeared, its form now less menacing. "You have faced your fears and proven yourselves worthy," it said, its voice softening. "The power of the spell is now in your hands, but be cautious. With great power comes great responsibility." Emma nodded, understanding the weight of the decision. "We will protect Ravenwood," she promised. "We will never let the shadows fall into darkness again." The figure nodded, its eyes filled with approval. "Then you are truly the keepers," it said, fading into the shadows. As the library's doors reopened, Emma and Edward emerged, the weight of their new responsibilities heavy on their shoulders. The shadows no longer whispered with fear, but with hope. Ravenwood was theirs to protect, and they would ensure it stayed safe for generations to come. The forest guardian watched from the trees as they emerged from the manor, its eyes gleaming with pride. "The keepers have returned," it whispered, knowing that the balance between light and shadow would remain unbroken. Together, Emma and Edward stood at the threshold of Ravenwood Manor, ready to face whatever new challenges awaited them. The legacy of Ravenwood was secure, and its guardians now and forever would remain vigilant. Days turned into weeks, and Ravenwood Manor slowly began to feel like home again. Emma and Edward settled into their roles as keepers, guarding the secrets of the manor and the shadows it contained. Yet, despite the peace, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking in the corners of the manor. One evening, while exploring the attic, Emma found an old, dust-covered mirror. The frame was ornate, adorned with strange symbols that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. As her fingers brushed against the glass, A chill ran down her spine. She felt a pull, a whisper in the air, beckoning her to look deeper into the mirror's depths. The moment Emma gazed into the mirror, the reflection blurred and a shadowy figure appeared. It was a woman, her face obscured by darkness. The figure spoke in a voice that was both haunting and familiar. "You are not the first keeper, Emma," it whispered. "And you will not be the last." Emma stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who are you?" she demanded. The figure only smiled, her eyes glowing with a cold, ancient light. "I was the first to protect Ravenwood, long before your time. But beware, for the shadows never forget their past." The figure vanished, leaving Emma standing alone with a sinking feeling in her stomach. The following night, Emma and Edward met in the manor's grand hall, discussing their new duties. But Emma couldn't shake the vision she had seen in the mirror. She told Edward everything, and he listened carefully, his brow furrowed in concern. "I've heard whispers of an ancient keeper who once controlled the manor's shadows," Edward said. "But I always thought they were just stories." Emma looked at him, her expression serious. "This wasn't a story, Edward. The shadows know more than we do, and they are warning us of something." Driven by the vision, Emma and Edward sought the advice of the manor's oldest books. They discovered that the first keeper was a woman named Isolde, who had bound the shadows to Ravenwood itself. But the more they read, the more they realized the danger she had faced. Isolde's powers were linked to the shadows, but they were also her prison. As she grew stronger, the shadows began to consume her, threatening to take control. The legacy of the first keeper was one of power and tragedy, and Emma and Edward now realized that they were inheriting more than just a duty. They were inheriting a curse. One evening, as they explored deeper into the manor, Emma felt a shift in the air. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more oppressive, as if they were alive, watching, waiting. "Something's not right," Emma whispered, feeling the familiar pull toward the attic once more. When they reached the attic, the mirror had changed. The woman's reflection now moved on its own, as if beckoning Emma closer. "You cannot escape the past," the woman's voice echoed, sending a shiver down Emma's spine. The shadows in the attic twisted and writhed, becoming more aggressive. Suddenly, the mirror cracked, and the shadows erupted from it, engulfing the room. Edward shouted, grabbing Emma's arm, pulling her back. "We need to get out of here," but it was too late. The shadows surged forward, wrapping themselves around them. The air grew thick, the walls closing in. Emma struggled against the shadows' grip, but they tightened, pulling her closer to the mirror. The woman's face appeared again, her eyes now glowing with a fierce light. "You are the new keeper, Emma," she said, her voice trembling with power. "But you are not ready to face what lies within." With a surge of panic, Emma reached for the book she had discovered earlier. Desperate, she flipped through its pages, searching for anything that might help. Her fingers landed on a page with a binding spell, one that could trap the shadows and seal them away forever. "Edward, help me," Emma cried. Together they began to chant the words from the book, their voices steady despite the chaos around them. The shadows roared in fury, but the binding spell began to take effect, slowly pulling them back into the mirror. The figure of Isolde screamed in rage as she vanished into the shadows. As the mirror shattered completely, the shadows were finally contained. The room grew silent, and the oppressive feeling lifted. Emma and Edward stood amidst the broken glass, breathing heavily. The attic was still, the danger gone for now. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The power of the shadows was still within her, just beneath the surface. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. Edward's eyes met hers. "For now," he said. "But we both know that the shadows will never truly leave Ravenwood." Weeks passed, and the manor returned to its quiet, eerie peace. But Emma could sense the shadows watching her, waiting for an opportunity to return. Late one night, as she walked through the halls, she felt a presence, a coldness that seemed to follow her every step. She stopped, her heart racing. The shadows were gathering again, whispering her name. "Emma," they called, their voices like a haunting melody. "You are not the first keeper, and you will not be the last." Emma turned to see a shadowy figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was Isolde, her form faint but unmistakable. Isolde's form shimmered before her, her eyes glowing like embers in the dark. "The shadows are always a part of Ravenwood," Isolde said softly. "And now they are a part of you. But remember, Emma, you must always be vigilant. The shadows are not just a curse, they are a power that can either protect or destroy." Emma nodded, understanding the weight of her new role. She had accepted the mantle of the keeper, but the journey was far from over. Ravenwood's shadows would always be with her, and she would have to live with the legacy of the first keeper, guarding the manor from forces both seen and unseen. The manor's eerie silence returned, but Emma knew that Ravenwood Manor would never be the same. The shadows had awakened, and they would always be watching. The days grew darker, and Emma felt a weight on her shoulders that she could not shake. She and Edward continued to guard the manor, but something had changed. The shadows seemed to creep closer with each passing night, their whispers filling the air. Emma couldn't escape the feeling that they were not just part of the manor, they were part of her now. One evening, as she sat in the library, she felt a cold breeze brush past her. The pages of an ancient book fluttered open, revealing a hidden chapter. The title was Clear the Veil of Shadows. She hesitated for a moment, then began to read. The words spoke of a hidden realm, a place between worlds where the shadows were born. It was a place Emma had to go to face her destiny. Edward found her later that night, staring at the book with a troubled look on her face. "What is it, Emma?" he asked. She showed him the pages. "This says there is a portal deep within Ravenwood," she explained. "A doorway to the world where the shadows are born. If I am to understand my role as the keeper, I need to go there." Edward looked uneasy. "But what if it's a trap? What if the shadows are trying to pull you in?" Emma met his gaze. "I have to face them, Edward. It's the only way to protect Ravenwood and to understand the curse that binds us all." The next night, they followed the book's instructions, descending into the hidden catacombs beneath the manor. The air grew thick with the scent of earth and ancient dust. The deeper they went, the more Emma could feel the presence of the shadows, pressing in from all sides. They reached a chamber, its walls covered in strange symbols and ancient carvings. In the center of the room stood a stone archway, its surface shimmering with a faint, eerie light. "This is it," Emma whispered. "This is the portal." She stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Edward grabbed her arm, his face pale with fear. "Are you sure about this?" Without answering, Emma stepped through the archway. The moment she crossed the threshold, the world around her shifted. She was no longer in the manor's catacombs. Instead, she found herself standing in a vast, shadowy realm. The sky was black, and the ground beneath her feet was made of shifting shadows. In the distance, she saw figures moving, their forms blurry and indistinct. The air was thick with the whispers of the shadows, their voices echoing all around her. "Welcome, Keeper," a voice said, familiar and yet distant. Emma spun around to find the shadowy figure of Isolde standing before her. Isolde's eyes glowed with an eerie light, and her voice was both sad and powerful. "You have come to face the truth," she said. "The shadows are not just a curse. They are a reflection of the world's deepest fears and desires. They feed on those who seek power, and they grow stronger with each soul they claim." Emma stepped closer, her heart racing. "But why me? Why am I the keeper?" she asked. Isolde's gaze softened. "You are the one chosen to break the cycle, to bring balance. But to do so, you must confront your own fears, Emma. The shadows are not just outside of you, they are within you as well." The shadows around Emma began to grow darker, swirling with a malevolent energy. "If you wish to understand your power, you must face your deepest fear," Isolde warned. Emma felt a rush of emotions flood her mind, the fear of failure, of losing everything she loved. The shadows seemed to feed on these fears, growing stronger with every passing moment. Suddenly, Emma was no longer in the shadow realm. She was back in Ravenwood, but everything was different. The manor was in ruins, the walls crumbling and covered in shadows. She saw Edward, but he was no longer the man she knew. His eyes were empty, his face twisted in pain. "This is what happens if you fail, Emma," he whispered. Emma stumbled back, feeling the weight of her fear bearing down on her. But deep within, something stirred. She had faced darkness before, and she could face it again. The power of the Keeper was not just about controlling the shadows, it was about understanding them. With newfound resolve, Emma reached out, her hands glowing with a bright light. The shadows recoiled, their grip loosening. She chanted the words from the book once more, and the vision of the ruined manor faded. She was back in the shadow realm, her power stronger than ever. Isolde nodded in approval. "You have passed the trial, Emma," she said. "You have faced your fears and conquered them. The shadows no longer control you." The dark realm began to shift, the shadows retreating to the edges. Emma's power surged, and the realm began to take shape, turning into a place of light and peace. But remember, Isolde warned, the shadows will always be with you. They are a part of Ravenwood, and they are a part of you. You must protect them, but never let them consume you. Emma nodded, her heart filled with both fear and determination. She knew her journey was far from over. With a final wave from Isolde, Emma and Edward found themselves back in Ravenwood Manor. The air was lighter, the shadows less oppressive. But Emma knew that the true battle was just beginning. The realm of shadows was now a part of her, and she would always carry its weight. "We did it," Edward said, his voice filled with relief. But Emma's eyes were filled with a quiet determination. "The shadows are not gone, Edward. They are still with us, and it's up to us to ensure they never break free." Ravenwood Manor was calm, for now. The shadows had been bound, but Emma knew they would never truly be gone. She had learned to live with them, to keep them in check. But she also knew that her role as keeper was far from over. As the days passed, Emma and Edward continued their work, guarding the manor and its secrets. They knew that the shadows would always be watching, waiting for their chance to break free. But for now, they had peace. And that was enough. But deep in the corners of Ravenwood, a new shadow began to stir. It was watching Emma, waiting for the right moment to return. The legacy of the Shadow Keeper was far from finished. Days passed peacefully in Ravenwood Manor, and the once ominous shadows seemed to have retreated. Emma felt a calmness she had not experienced in years. She spent her days in the manor's gardens, tending to the flowers, and her nights in the library, reading the ancient texts she had discovered. But even in the quiet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The shadows, though subdued, still whispered in the corners of her mind, their presence lingering like an unspoken threat. She knew it was only a matter of time before they returned in full force. One evening, as Emma was walking through the hallways of the manor, she noticed a shadow flicker across the walls. She stopped, her heart racing. It wasn't a shadow she recognized, it was something new, something darker. Moments later, the doorbell rang. Emma hesitated, but then walked toward the front door. When she opened it, a tall figure stood before her, cloaked in darkness. His face was hidden in the shadows, but Emma could feel his presence, a chilling energy that made her skin crawl. I seek the Keeper. The figure said in a low, gravelly voice. I have come with a message. Emma stepped back, startled by the stranger's words. She could sense the power within him, a dark force unlike any she had felt before. What do you want? She asked, her voice steady but her heart pounding. The figure stepped into the doorway, his face still hidden. I am the Keeper of the Abyss, he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. And I bring a warning. The shadows you bound are not the only ones in existence. There are darker forces beyond your control, forces that seek to break free. Emma's mind raced. She had thought that by binding the shadows in Ravenwood, she had sealed away all threats. But this new keeper spoke of something far more dangerous. The stranger's words weighed heavily on Emma as she led him into the manor. If these forces are beyond my control, then what am I supposed to do? She asked, her voice filled with frustration. The Keeper of the Abyss stood tall, his eyes glowing with an eerie light. You must learn the true nature of the shadows, Emma. They are not mere spirits, they are ancient beings, creatures of the night. They are as old as the earth itself, and they have always been part of this world. But now they are awakening. And they will stop at nothing to break free. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She had always believed the shadows were simply a curse, a punishment for the sins of the past. But now she realized they were far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The Keeper of the Abyss explained there was a way to stop the shadows from escaping, but it would not be easy. Emma would have to travel to the heart of the Dark Realm, the place where the shadows were born, and perform a ritual to seal them away once and for all. You must go alone. The Keeper said, no one else can accompany you on this journey. The shadows will try to deceive you, to lead you astray. Only you can face them and end this threat. Emma knew that this was a dangerous path, but it was one she had no choice but to take. She had made a promise to protect Ravenwood, and she would do whatever it took to keep her family and the manor safe. With a heavy heart, Emma gathered her belongings and said her goodbyes to Edward. He tried to hide his concern but couldn't mask the worry in his eyes. Be careful, he said, his voice filled with fear. This is not something you should face alone. Emma smiled weakly and placed a hand on his shoulder. I have no choice. The shadows will return if I don't do this. I have to end it once and for all. With those final words, Emma stepped into the darkness of the night, the Keeper of the Abyss guiding her toward the unknown. The journey to the Dark Realm was long and treacherous. The air grew thick with fog, and strange, distorted shapes seemed to move just beyond her sight. The shadows were alive here, watching her every move, waiting for the moment when they could strike. As Emma walked deeper into the heart of the dark realm, she felt the weight of her mission pressing down on her. She could sense the power of the shadows growing stronger with each step, but she didn't falter. She had faced darkness before, and she could face it again. At long last, Emma reached the heart of the dark realm. Before her stood a massive, twisted tree, its branches stretching toward the sky like gnarled fingers. The ground beneath her feet was made of swirling shadows, and the air was thick with a sense of malevolent power. This was the source of the shadows, the place where they had been born, the heart of their existence. Emma stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The keeper of the abyss had warned her of the dangers of this place, but she had no choice. She had to complete the ritual. The ritual was unlike anything Emma had ever done before. She had to draw upon the power of the shadows themselves, using their energy to bind them once more. She recited the incantations, her voice steady despite the overwhelming power that surrounded her. But as she spoke the final words of the ritual, something went wrong. The shadows twisted and writhed, their voices rising in anger. Emma felt a surge of fear, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. She had come too far to fail now. The shadows erupted in a violent surge, their forms becoming monstrous and terrifying. They swarmed around Emma, their cold hands reaching for her. She could feel their darkness trying to consume her, but she fought back with every ounce of strength she had. With a final, desperate cry, Emma released all of her power. The shadows screamed as they were torn apart, their forms dissipating into nothingness. The dark realm began to crumble, its power fading away. Emma had done it. The shadows were finally sealed away, their reign of terror over. But as the realm collapsed around her, Emma knew that this victory came at a cost. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the battle was far from over. The shadows were gone for now. But she knew they would always be watching, waiting for the next chance to break free. Emma awoke in the early hours of the morning, her body aching from the ordeal. The dark realm had crumbled, but it had taken its toll on her. She looked around, finding herself back in Ravenwood Manor, bathed in the soft light of the rising sun. The air was calm, and the once oppressive shadows seemed to have lifted. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma felt a sense of peace. The shadows were gone. The darkness had been sealed away. She had won. But as she sat up, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was not truly over. There was still something lingering in the corners of her mind, a whisper of doubt that would not fade. In the days that followed, life in Ravenwood slowly returned to normal. The manor felt brighter, warmer, and the oppressive weight of the shadows was no longer present. Emma and Edward spent their days together, rebuilding their lives, but Emma's mind was never completely at ease. The shadows might have been sealed, but the scars they left behind would never fade. She had fought so hard to protect the manor and the people she loved, but the cost was great. Her dreams were haunted by the images of the dark realm, and she often awoke in a cold sweat, wondering if she had truly defeated the shadows for good. One night, as Emma sat by the fireplace, reading one of the old books from the manor's library, she heard a knock at the door. She stood up, her heart racing. Who could be visiting at this hour? When she opened the door, she found no one. But there, lying on the doorstep, was a small black feather. Emma picked it up, her fingers trembling. It was the same feather that had appeared in her dreams, the one she had seen fluttering around the Keeper of the Abyss. This was no ordinary feather. It was a sign. The appearance of the feather disturbed Emma deeply. She kept it close, unsure of what it meant, but knowing that it was significant. In the days that followed, strange things began happening around Ravenwood. The shadows, though not as powerful as before, began to stir once again, creeping into the corners of rooms, flickering in the corners of her vision. She knew, then, that the shadows had not truly been defeated. They were only waiting, biding their time until they could find a way back into the world. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she had been wrong. The battle was not over. It was only just beginning. The nights grew darker once more. Emma would wake to find strange marks on the walls, symbols she had never seen before. Each mark was a reminder that the shadows were still out there, waiting. One evening, as Emma walked through the hallways of Ravenwood Manor, she felt a cold draft and heard whispers in the air. The shadows were returning. But this time they were not just shadows, they were something more. The very fabric of Ravenwood was being torn apart as the darkness tried to reclaim its power. Emma knew she could not face this new threat alone. In a desperate attempt to save the manor, Emma sought out the Keeper of the Abyss once more. She traveled to the place where she had first met him, the heart of the Dark Realm. There, she found him waiting, as though he had known she would return. You were warned, Emma, the Keeper said, his voice somber. The shadows you sealed were never truly gone. They are part of the world's balance. You cannot destroy them, you can only control them. And in seeking to banish them, you have upset that balance. Emma realized then that the shadows were not enemies to be destroyed, but forces to be understood and controlled. In her attempt to rid the world of them, she had upset the natural order. The darkness had only grown stronger in response. The Keeper offered Emma a choice. She could attempt to banish the shadows once more, but this time the cost would be far greater. If she failed, the shadows would consume Ravenwood and everything she held dear. The only other option was to embrace the darkness, to become its ally, and to learn how to control it. Emma felt torn. To embrace the shadows would mean accepting the darkness within herself, something she was terrified of. But to continue fighting them might only bring about her destruction. She was caught in a difficult decision, unsure of which path to choose. After much thought, Emma made her decision. She would learn to control the shadows, to live with them instead of trying to destroy them. But as she began the process of accepting the darkness within her, she could feel the shadows' touch deepening. Her mind became clouded, her thoughts dark and twisted. The shadows whispered in her ear, urging her to embrace their power fully. Emma fought to keep control, but it was becoming harder to resist. She was beginning to feel as though the shadows were no longer separate from her, but part of her very being. The Keeper of the Abyss watched Emma carefully, sensing her internal struggle. "You have made your choice, Emma," he said. "Now you must prove your strength. The shadows will test you, push you to your limits. Only then will you truly understand what it means to control the darkness." Emma nodded, determined to face whatever the shadows threw at her. She could feel their presence growing stronger, their power beginning to surge within her. She had chosen this path, and now she would see it through, no matter the cost. The shadows began to swirl around Emma, their power overwhelming her. But instead of fighting them, she reached out and accepted their presence. The darkness entered her, and for a moment, Emma felt as though she had become one with it. But as the shadows pressed against her, trying to consume her completely, Emma made a final, desperate choice. She used the power of the shadows not to control them, but to banish them forever. With one last surge of energy, she sealed the shadows away for good, sacrificing herself in the process. Emma's body collapsed, but Ravenwood Manor was safe. The shadows were gone, and the manor would remain protected. Emma's sacrifice had ensured that no one would ever have to face the darkness again. Her legacy, as the true keeper, would live on forever. The air around Ravenwood Manor felt still, almost too still. As dawn broke, the sun's rays pierced through the windows, casting a golden glow upon the once darkened halls. The shadows were gone, and with them, the oppressive presence that had haunted the manor for so long. The silence was almost overwhelming, but it was a peaceful silence. Emma's sacrifice had ensured that the darkness would never return. The manor stood strong, a symbol of the bravery and determination that had kept it safe. Yet Emma's absence left a heavy heart in those who had known her. Months passed, and life at Ravenwood began to settle into a new normal. But the memory of Emma and her sacrifice lived on in the hearts of those who had loved her. Edward, still mourning her loss, found himself drawn to the old books she had left behind. One evening, as he flipped through one of her journals, he discovered something strange. In the final pages of the book, Emma had written a note, one she had left for him in case of her passing. It was a message of hope, urging him to keep the manor safe and to remember that the shadows, though gone, would always remain a part of Ravenwood. He was to become the new keeper. Edward stood in the heart of Ravenwood Manor, feeling the weight of the responsibility that had been placed upon him. The role of keeper was not something he had ever imagined for himself, but Emma had trusted him with it. He had to live up to her legacy, to ensure that the shadows would never return. The manor felt different now, quieter in a way. But as the days passed, Edward began to feel the presence of something watching him, just beyond his reach. The shadows were no longer a force to be feared, but their essence still lingered, a reminder of the price that had been paid. He could sense them, faintly, as if they were waiting for the right moment to return. One evening, as Edward walked through the corridors of the manor, he heard faint whispers. They seemed to come from the walls, from the very fabric of the manor itself. He stopped in his tracks, listening carefully. The whispers grew louder, though they were not hostile, just faint murmurs of voices long silenced. Edward knew that the shadows were not completely gone. They had been sealed away, yes, but their presence remained, woven into the very bones of the manor. It was a reminder that the darkness could never be fully erased, only controlled. That night, Edward dreamt of Emma. She stood in a field, bathed in the light of the full moon, smiling softly at him. "You are the keeper now, Edward," she said. "You must keep Ravenwood safe, but remember, you are not alone. The shadows will never leave you, but you can learn to live with them." The dream felt so real that Edward woke with a start, his heart pounding. He had never been one to believe in dreams, but the message was clear. Emma's spirit was still with him, guiding him as he navigated his new role. The whispers continued, but they were no longer just in the walls. Edward began to hear them in his thoughts, faint and indistinct. The shadows seemed to be reaching out to him, as if testing his resolve. He wasn't sure if it was the remnants of the darkness, or if he was losing his grip on reality. One night, he found a message written in the dust on one of the old bookshelves. It was a single word: beware. Edward's heart raced. The shadows were warning him. But what exactly were they trying to tell him? Curious, Edward searched the manor for any clues about the warning. As he explored the forgotten corners of Ravenwood, he stumbled upon a hidden passage in the basement. It had been concealed behind a bookshelf, and only the faintest trace of a draft hinted at its existence. He entered the passage, which led him deep underground. The air was thick and musty, and as he ventured further, he felt a sense of dread settle in his chest. At the end of the passage, he discovered a hidden room, its walls covered in symbols and markings he did not understand. It was a dark place, and something told him it had been sealed for a reason. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and upon it lay a small black box. The box was intricately carved, and the markings on it seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Edward hesitated, but something compelled him to open it. Inside, he found an ancient relic, a shadowed crystal that seemed to hum with a life of its own. The moment he touched it, a wave of darkness washed over him, and he heard the whispers grow louder, more urgent. The shadows were awakening, and they were calling to him. He had unknowingly disturbed something that had been sleeping for centuries. As soon as the crystal touched his skin, Edward felt a dark energy course through him. His vision blurred, and he saw the shadows swirling around him, growing stronger and more powerful. The relic was a conduit for the darkness, and now that it had been disturbed, the shadows were returning with a vengeance. Edward staggered back, his heart racing. He knew he had made a grave mistake. The shadows were no longer merely whispers in the walls, they were now fully awake, and they were hungry for power. The crystal had bound him to them, and he could feel their strength growing with every passing second. Edward knew that he had only one choice to seal the shadows away once again. But this time, the cost would be far greater. The shadows were more powerful than ever, and sealing them would require all of his strength and more. He could feel the weight of the crystal in his hands, and he knew that if he didn't act quickly, Ravenwood would fall to the shadows. With a deep breath, Edward made his decision. He would use the power of the crystal to bind the shadows once more, even if it meant sacrificing himself to do so. The price was high, but it was the only way to protect the manor and everyone he loved. As Edward prepared to face the shadows once again, he could feel their presence growing stronger. The crystal in his hand pulsed with dark energy, as if aware of his intention to seal it away once more. The whispers were louder now, filling his mind with visions of what would happen if he failed. He had no choice but to continue. Ravenwood Manor depended on him, and so did the safety of the world beyond its walls. He gathered his courage and made his way to the center of the manor, where the shadows had once been bound. The air felt thick with tension, as if the manor itself was holding its breath. Edward stood in the heart of Ravenwood Manor, the crystal gripped tightly in his hands. He had studied the old rituals Emma had left behind, and now it was time to perform the most dangerous one. The shadows were close now, and he could feel their cold breath on his neck. They were waiting for him to make the first move. He began to chant the ancient words from the book, his voice trembling with fear but steady with determination. As the words echoed through the manor, the shadows began to swirl, gathering around him like a storm. The crystal in his hands glowed brighter, drawing the shadows toward it. Edward felt their icy tendrils reaching for him, trying to pull him into their darkness. The shadows fought back against the sealing ritual, their power rising in response to Edward's efforts. He felt the pressure building within him, as if the very essence of the shadows was trying to consume him. The whispers in his mind grew louder, more frantic. They told him that he could never truly banish them, that they would always return. But Edward refused to listen. He fought back with all his strength, focusing on the power of the crystal and the words of the ritual. As the shadows pressed in on him, he could feel his strength waning, but he didn't give up. He knew that the only way to save Ravenwood was to endure, to push the shadows back and trap them once more. The darkness was overwhelming now. Edward's hands shook with exhaustion, but he continued the ritual, each word a battle against the growing shadow. The crystal in his hands shone with a blinding light, and the shadows recoiled, hissing in fury. He could feel them pulling at him, trying to drag him into their abyss. In one final, desperate move, Edward slammed the crystal into the floor. A burst of light exploded from it, and the shadows screamed in agony as they were sucked into the crystal. The force of the explosion sent Edward flying backward, crashing to the ground. For a moment, everything went silent. Edward lay on the floor, gasping for breath. The air around him felt still, too still. He could feel the weight of the crystal in his hand, but the shadows were gone. At least, that's what he thought. Slowly, he pushed himself up, his body aching from the effort. As he stood, he noticed the silence in the manor was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The shadows had been sealed away, but their presence lingered in the air, a reminder that darkness was never truly gone. Edward knew that the battle had been won for now, but the shadows would always be there, lurking in the corners, waiting for another chance to return. The days that followed were quiet, almost unnervingly so. Edward spent his time going through Emma's journals, looking for any clues about what to do next. The ritual had worked, but the cost was high. He could feel the weight of the shadows in his soul, a constant reminder of what he had faced. He knew that the manor would never be the same. The darkness had been a part of it for so long, and now, even though the shadows were sealed away, they had left their mark on him. Edward could feel the connection between himself and the manor growing stronger, as if he had become its protector, bound to it in a way he couldn't fully understand. In the months that followed, Edward continued to live at Ravenwood Manor, but the sense of unease never fully left him. He had become the keeper, just as Emma had been before him, but now he understood the true burden of the role. The shadows were sealed, but their influence still lingered. He began to notice strange occurrences around the manor, objects shifting in the night, whispers in the dark, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. It wasn't the shadows returning, but something else, something far older. The legacy of Ravenwood was not just about the shadows, it was about the power that had once lived within the walls of the manor. One evening, as Edward explored the manor's attic, he stumbled upon a hidden chest. Inside, he found more ancient relics, each one more mysterious than the last. Some of them were similar to the shadow crystal, but others were different, glowing with strange symbols and runes. As he examined the relics, Edward felt a strange pull toward one in particular. It was a black stone, smooth and polished, with a faint pulse of energy. When he touched it, a vision flashed before his eyes, an image of the manor consumed by fire, the shadows swirling around it, and a figure standing at the center. The vision faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Edward shaken and confused. The vision left Edward with more questions than answers. Who was the figure in the vision? What did it mean for Ravenwood Manor? And most importantly, what had caused the manor to be consumed by fire in the first place? He couldn't shake the feeling that something worse than the shadows was lurking just beyond his reach. He returned to the journals Emma had left behind, hoping to find some clue that would explain the strange vision. But as he read, he discovered something disturbing. The shadows were not the only force that had been sealed away in the manor's history. There were other dark entities, other powers, and they were waiting for the right moment to break free. Edward stood at the edge of Ravenwood's grounds, gazing out at the looming clouds in the distance. The storm that had been brewing in the air had finally arrived. The winds howled, and the earth trembled beneath his feet. It was as though the very world was preparing for something terrible to come. He knew that the shadows were not the only threat Ravenwood faced. There was something darker, something older, and it was beginning to stir once more. Edward was the keeper, but he had only begun to understand the true nature of his role. The storm had come, and with it, the greatest challenge Ravenwood had ever known. As the storm raged outside, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The winds howled through the manor's old walls, and the windows rattled in their frames. He stood by the fireplace, the crackling flames casting eerie shadows that danced around the room. It was as if the manor itself was alive, reacting to the storm. The black stone he had discovered in the attic pulsed in his pocket, sending chills down his spine. The vision he had seen earlier returned to him, Ravenwood Manor consumed by flames, the shadows swirling like a vortex around it. Who was the figure in the vision? And why did the storm feel like a prelude to something far worse? Edward paced the manor's halls, unable to shake the unease that had settled over him. It was as if something unseen was moving through the house, something ancient and powerful. The storm outside raged on, but the strange presence within the manor seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. He wasn't alone. He felt the eyes of something watching him, lurking in the dark corners of Ravenwood. The shadows had been sealed away, but this new presence was different. It was not of the darkness he had fought before. This was something older, more ancient, and far more dangerous. Determined to uncover the truth, Edward decided to search for any hidden secrets the manor might be hiding. He had explored most of the house, but there were areas he had never dared to venture. There were whispers of a forbidden chamber beneath the manor, a place sealed away by Emma herself. With a torch in hand, Edward descended into the manor's depths, his heart pounding with each step. The air grew colder as he approached the hidden door, and he could feel the weight of something ancient pressing down on him. The stone door creaked open, revealing a chamber that had not seen the light of day for centuries. Inside the forbidden chamber, Edward discovered a dusty old tome. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the symbols etched on them sent a jolt of recognition through his body. This was the book Emma had warned him about. The book that contained the secrets of Ravenwood's true history. As Edward carefully flipped through the pages, he learned of a power far greater than the shadows, the ancient entity that had been sealed away in the manor's deepest depths. It was a creature of unimaginable darkness, capable of consuming not just the manor, but the very fabric of reality itself. And the storm outside, it was a sign that the entity was awakening. The more Edward read, the more he realized that the true purpose of Ravenwood Manor was not just to contain the shadows, but to hold back the ancient darkness that had once nearly destroyed the world. The entity had been sealed away by the first keepers, but now it was awakening. Edward could feel the power of the entity stirring beneath the manor, a dark presence that reached out with invisible tendrils. The storm outside intensified, and with each flash of lightning, the dark energy within the manor seemed to grow stronger. Ravenwood was no longer just a home, it was a prison, and Edward was its reluctant warden. The book spoke of a ritual, one that could either banish the entity forever or release it into the world once again. Edward's heart sank as he read the final words of the ancient text. The ritual could only be performed by the true keeper, and the cost would be great. The keeper would have to sacrifice everything to ensure that the entity was sealed away once more. Edward closed the book, his mind racing. He had been chosen to face this darkness, but at what cost? Could he truly sacrifice himself for the safety of Ravenwood? The storm outside raged on, and Edward knew that the time to act was drawing near. That night, as Edward sat by the fire, lost in thought, he heard a soft knock on the door. He wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, he opened it, only to find a cloaked figure standing in the doorway. The figure's face was hidden, but the voice that emerged was unmistakable. It's time. The figure whispered. Edward's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the voice. It was Emma's. But Emma had disappeared years ago, her fate a mystery. Had she returned? Or was this some trick of the dark entity? The cloaked figure stepped inside, and as it did, Edward could see the faintest glimmer of a familiar face beneath the hood. It was Emma, or at least, someone who appeared to be her. The figure's presence was overwhelming, and for a moment, Edward couldn't speak. He had thought Emma was lost forever, but now, here she was. Emma, Edward whispered, his voice trembling. Is it really you? The figure nodded slowly, stepping closer. I have returned to help you, she said. But the path ahead is not easy. The darkness you face is older than even the shadows, and you are not the only keeper who has been chosen. Emma revealed the truth that Edward had feared. The keeper was not one person, it was a legacy passed down through generations, each keeper chosen to face the darkness when the time came. Emma had been the keeper before him, but she had failed in her task to fully seal the entity away. Now, it was Edward's turn to complete what she had started. You must do what I could not, Emma said, her eyes filled with sorrow. You must sacrifice everything to protect this world. Edward's heart ached as he realized the full weight of his responsibility. He was not just protecting Ravenwood, he was protecting the very fabric of existence itself. Edward stood at the edge of Ravenwood Manor, gazing out at the storm that now consumed the world outside. The time had come to face the darkness, to perform the ritual and seal away the ancient entity forever. But the price was high. He would have to sacrifice everything, even his own life. As he looked at Emma's face, he knew what he had to do. The world needed him. Ravenwood needed him. And though the cost was great, Edward was ready. With one last look at the manor, he stepped forward into the storm, knowing that the future of everything rested on his shoulders. Edward stood at the center of the manor's grand hall, the wind howling outside. The ritual required absolute concentration, and time was running out. The storm was growing fiercer, and he could feel the ancient entity's power pushing against the walls of Ravenwood. With Emma's guidance, he had gathered the necessary tools, candles, herbs, and the ancient stone he had found earlier. As the wind battered against the windows, Edward prepared himself mentally for what lay ahead. The sacrifice was unavoidable. He would have to give up everything, the life he knew, his future, and perhaps even his soul. Yet he felt a strange calm wash over him. This was his destiny. This was the only way to protect the world from the darkness that threatened to consume it. With a deep breath, Edward lit the first candle, watching as the flame flickered in the dim room. The air felt thick, charged with energy. Emma stood by his side, her face grave. "The first step is the hardest," she whispered. "Once the ritual begins, there is no turning back." Edward nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He placed the ancient stone in the center of the circle and began to chant the incantation from the book. The words felt strange on his tongue, ancient and powerful. As he spoke, the ground beneath him trembled. Ravenwood Manor seemed to awaken, its walls groaning as if in pain. The storm outside intensified, lightning flashing across the sky. As the chant continued, Edward felt a sudden surge of energy, unlike anything he had ever experienced. The shadows in the room began to shift, swirling around him like smoke. The power of the ancient entity stirred beneath the manor, its dark presence rising. Edward gritted his teeth, pushing forward with the chant, focusing all of his energy into the ritual. Emma stood silent beside him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. "You're doing it," she whispered, though her voice was barely audible over the storm's roar. "The darkness is awakening. You must hold on, Edward. You are the last line of defense." The shadows in the room grew stronger, and Edward could feel the entity's power pressing against him. It was as if the darkness itself was trying to break free from its prison. The ground beneath him cracked, and the air grew heavy, suffocating. He struggled to keep his focus, knowing that if he faltered, the entity would escape, and all would be lost. "Don't let go," Emma shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. Edward's heart pounded in his chest as he fought to stay grounded. He had come so far, but the entity was relentless. It lashed out, sending waves of dark energy through the room. Edward felt as though his very soul was being torn apart. With one final surge of strength, Edward spoke the last words of the incantation. The room erupted in a blinding light, and for a moment, everything went silent. The shadows were gone. The storm outside ceased. And in that silence, Edward knew it was done. But at what cost? He collapsed to his knees, exhausted and broken. Emma rushed to his side, her face filled with concern. "Edward, you did it," she whispered. "The entity is sealed away." But she paused, her voice trailing off. "But the cost. Edward smiled weakly, knowing that the price he had paid was steep. But in that moment, he knew it had been worth it. The darkness was gone, and Ravenwood Manor was safe for now. Edward lay on the cold stone floor, his body heavy with exhaustion. The bright light had faded, and the room now felt eerily still. The storm outside had subsided, leaving an unnatural calm in its wake. Emma knelt beside him, her eyes filled with both relief and sadness. "You've saved us, Edward," she said softly, her voice trembling. Edward managed a faint smile. He had succeeded in sealing away the ancient entity, but it had come at a cost. His strength was drained, and the weight of the sacrifice still lingered in his heart. Ravenwood Manor was safe, but would he ever be the same? The shadows had been defeated, but the price had been high. As Edward slowly sat up, he realized that something felt different. The air was no longer thick with the oppressive energy that had surrounded him during the ritual. But there was still something faint, yet unsettling. The shadows that had once filled the manor had vanished, but now in their place lingered an empty void. Emma stood by the window, her gaze distant. "The darkness is gone, but it has left behind a scar," she murmured. "Ravenwood will never be the same again." The keeper's bloodline is forever tied to this place. Edward understood her words. The manor had been his home, but now it was a prison of sorts. The shadows may have been sealed, but the legacy of the keeper would haunt him forever. Days passed, and the storm outside finally cleared. Yet the strange unease that hung over Ravenwood Manor did not lift. Edward wandered the empty halls, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The shadows had been banished, but the manor itself seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for something. Late one evening, as Edward stood by the fireplace, he felt it, a faint presence, like a whisper just beyond his reach. It wasn't the entity, but something else, something familiar. He turned around quickly, but there was no one there. The feeling lingered, creeping along his spine, a reminder that the shadows might be gone, but their mark had been left behind. That night, as Edward prepared to retire to his room, he heard a soft knock at the door. He opened it cautiously, only to find a figure standing in the dim hallway. The figure was tall, cloaked in shadow, and its face was obscured. Edward's heart skipped a beat as recognition swept over him. It was the keeper before him, the one who had sealed away the darkness in the past, the one whose legacy had been passed down to him. The figure stepped forward, revealing the faint outline of a familiar face. It was an image of someone long lost, someone Edward never thought he would meet. "You have done well," the figure said in a deep, echoing voice. "But there is more to this story, more that you must understand." Edward listened intently as the figure spoke, revealing the true nature of the keeper's legacy. It wasn't just about sealing away the darkness, it was about understanding it, controlling it. "The entity you sealed," the figure explained, "was never meant to be destroyed. It is a part of you, part of the keeper's bloodline. Your connection to it is both a gift and a curse." Edward's heart raced as the figure's words sank in. He had thought he had destroyed the darkness for good, but now he realized that it was a part of him forever. The shadows were not gone, they were now within him, bound by the ritual, waiting for the next keeper to rise. The battle was not over, it had only just begun. Edward stood in stunned silence, processing the keeper's words. The shadows, the darkness, had not been destroyed but contained. His role as the keeper had only just begun, and there was no escaping the weight of his responsibility. The figure before him, a shadow of the past, slowly faded into the mist. "Remember, Edward," it whispered, "you are the vessel now." Emma entered the room, her eyes searching Edward's face. She could see the fear and uncertainty in his expression. "What did it say?" she asked softly. Edward turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't just about sealing the darkness. It's inside me now. I'm the keeper." One night, as Edward stood before the mirror in his chamber, he saw something that made his blood run cold. His reflection was not his own. The man staring back at him had hollow eyes, as if drained of life, and shadows clung to his skin like a second layer. For a brief moment, Edward saw the face of the entity, its eyes glowing faintly within his own. He stumbled back, heart pounding in his chest. Was he losing himself? Was he becoming the very thing he had fought so hard to seal away? The voice in his mind whispered, soft but insistent, "Embrace it, Edward. Let the shadows guide you." In the days that followed, Edward struggled with the truth of his new identity. He no longer felt like the man he had once been. Ravenwood Manor, once a place of refuge, now felt like a prison. Every corner seemed to whisper secrets, and the shadows lingered longer than they should have. At night, Edward often woke to strange sensations, as though the darkness within him was stirring, calling to him. Emma did her best to comfort him, but even her presence could not quiet the growing unease in his heart. "You must embrace your destiny, Edward," she would say. "The shadows are a part of you now. But they are not your enemy. You are the keeper yet." Edward couldn't help but wonder how much of the darkness could he control before it consumed him entirely. The days grew darker, and Edward's internal battle became harder to fight. The shadows within him were growing stronger, their whispers louder. It was as if they were trying to merge with his soul, urging him to abandon his humanity. He could feel the coldness creeping in, the sense that he was losing himself bit by bit. Emma noticed the change in him, the way he withdrew into himself. "Edward, please, talk to me," she begged. But even her voice seemed distant to him now. The shadows were becoming his only companion. He no longer trusted his own thoughts. "What if I am the darkness now?" he wondered. It was on a stormy night, much like the one when the ritual had begun, that Edward's true test came. As he walked through the manor's halls, he heard the whispering voices again, clearer this time. They were no longer just in his mind. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and writhe, as if alive. Edward felt the pull deep inside him, a thirst for power, for control over the very darkness that had once tormented him. He reached the grand hall, where the ancient stone still lay in the center of the room. His hand hovered over it, and for a moment he considered using its power once more. Would it be so wrong to let the shadows take control? After all, he had been chosen for this role. He was the keeper. But something within him held back. He wasn't sure if it was his humanity or something deeper, but he couldn't give in just yet. Despite his resistance, the shadows continued to grow stronger. Every day, Edward felt himself slipping further from the man he had been. The darkness was no longer just a part of him, it was consuming him. One evening, in a moment of weakness, he found himself drawn to the forbidden part of the manor. A place long sealed off from the rest of the house. He had heard whispers of its stories told in hushed tones by the elders of Ravenwood. It was said that the most dangerous secrets of the keepers were hidden there. Could the answers he sought lie within? As he stepped into the forbidden room, he was greeted by a chilling sight. The walls were covered in old, cryptic symbols, and in the center, a large mirror stood, its surface clouded by time. As Edward approached the mirror, he felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. He reached out and touched the glass, and in an instant, the image before him shifted. The reflection was not of him, but of the previous keeper, his ancestor. The figure in the mirror spoke, its voice echoing in Edward's mind. "You must understand, Edward. The shadows are not evil. They are balance. Without them, there is no light." Edward's mind raced. Could this be the answer he had been seeking? The shadows were not to be feared but controlled. The reflection of the keeper continued, "You must learn to master them, or you will lose yourself forever." Edward's mind swirled with confusion and revelation. The shadows, the entity, everything he had fought against, they were all part of the balance between light and darkness. He was not just the keeper to seal away the darkness, but to maintain that balance. But how? The ancient texts had never mentioned this. He had been trained to destroy the shadows, not control them. As the figure in the mirror faded, a deep understanding washed over Edward. The key to his survival, to Ravenwood's survival, was not in fighting the shadows, but in accepting them as part of himself. He was not their master, but their guardian. and it was his duty to ensure they never tipped the balance too far in one direction. As the days passed, Edward worked tirelessly to learn how to control the shadows within him. He spent hours in the forbidden room, meditating, reflecting, and attempting to communicate with the entity. Slowly, he began to understand its nature. The darkness was not a force to be fought, but a force to be channeled. He could not allow it to consume him, but he could coexist with it. But with this newfound power came a price. Edward could no longer walk away from his destiny. The shadows would always be a part of him, and he would forever be tied to Ravenwood. But in that moment, he made a decision to embrace his role as the keeper, not as a prisoner, but as a guardian. Edward stood in the heart of Ravenwood Manor, the weight of his responsibility settling within him. The shadows no longer felt like enemies, they were part of the landscape of his life. He could feel them, tugging at the edges of his consciousness, but he was no longer afraid. Emma stood beside him, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. "You've changed, Edward," she said softly. He nodded, a quiet smile on his lips. "Yes," he replied. "But I finally accepted who I am." And so, the new keeper of Ravenwood Manor embraced the darkness within him, knowing that it would always be there, guiding him, challenging him, but never truly defeating him. The balance had been restored, and Edward knew that his journey was far from over. With each passing day, Edward grew more accustomed to the shadows that now dwelled within him. His thoughts no longer raced with fear, but instead with clarity. The shadows had become a part of him, like a second heartbeat, and he had learned to listen to their whispers not as a threat, but as guidance. The dark presence was no longer a looming figure, but an ally, one that required respect and careful balance. As he walked through the halls of Ravenwood Manor, he could feel the weight of the shadows following him, shifting with every step. The manor had grown quieter, almost reverent, as if the house itself recognized the change in its keeper. Edward knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but he was ready. The shadows were no longer something to fear, they were his responsibility. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma sat beside Edward by the fireplace. The warmth of the flames flickered in their eyes, but the atmosphere around them was charged with the silent tension of the shadows. "You've come so far," Emma said, her voice filled with both admiration and concern. "But I see the toll it takes on you, Edward. You've become someone else." Edward sighed, the weight of his promise settling on him. "I haven't changed, Emma. I've simply embraced the truth of who I am." He turned to her, his eyes filled with both love and a lingering sorrow. "I promise you, I will protect Ravenwood. I will protect you. But the shadows, they will always be with me." Emma nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of his words. She didn't fully understand the power he now wielded, but she knew that his heart was still the same. Days turned into weeks, and Edward's vigilance never wavered. The shadows, once chaotic and untamed, had fallen into a rhythm quiet, almost docile, as if they too had accepted their role in the world. But still, Edward kept his watch. Something told him that the balance was fragile, that at any moment the darkness could break free once again. Late one night, as he walked the manor's halls, a strange chill filled the air. The shadows seemed to pulse with life, shifting unnaturally. Edward's heart raced. He reached out, feeling the darkness close around him, but this time it was different. It was not a whisper, but a cry, a call for help. His mind raced. Was something trying to escape? Was there something else in the shadows? The sound of the cry lingered in Edward's mind as he stood motionless in the darkened hall. It was a sound unlike anything he had heard before, a desperate, guttural scream that seemed to echo from the very walls. Edward felt a pang of dread. His shadows, were stirring, but they were not afraid. They were responding to something. Without thinking, Edward moved toward the source of the cry. His instincts guided him, pulling him deeper into the manor. The house seemed to breathe around him, its walls alive with the energy of the shadows. As he reached the old, forgotten wing of the manor, he felt the presence. Something ancient, something powerful lay hidden there, and it was calling out to him. In the forgotten wing of the manor, Edward found a door he had never noticed before. It was old, its wood warped by time, but the faint glow of something within seeped through the cracks. As he stepped forward, the shadows recoiled, and he could hear the whispers growing louder. The darkness within him seemed to recognize this place, this door. He had been here before, in another life, another time. His hand trembled as he reached for the door, feeling an undeniable pull. The handle was cold to the touch, almost as if it had been waiting for him. As he turned it, the door creaked open, revealing a hidden chamber bathed in a soft, eerie light. Inside, Edward saw something that made his breath catch in his throat, an ancient mirror, standing tall in the center of the room. The moment Edward stepped into the chamber, the air shifted. The whispers became clearer, more urgent. He moved toward the mirror, his reflection distorted in its surface. The mirror was not like any other. It was alive, its surface shifting with a life of its own, showing glimpses of a past long forgotten. As Edward gazed into it, he saw the true history of Ravenwood Manor, its dark origins, the first keeper, and the twisted bond between the shadows and the bloodline of the manor's keepers. The mirror spoke, its voice deep and echoing. "You seek the truth, Edward. But do you understand what you have become? You are the keeper, yes, but you are also the prisoner of the darkness you control." Edward recoiled, the weight of the words sinking in. He had known this was not an easy path, but to be bound to the shadows for eternity. Was this the price of balance? The mirror's words haunted Edward as he stepped back, his thoughts clouded with doubt. Was he truly free? Or had he simply traded one form of imprisonment for another? The shadows, which had once seemed like an ally, now felt like a heavy chain. Could he ever break free of the cycle, or was this his fate to forever serve as the keeper of the darkness? Emma's voice broke through his thoughts. "Edward," she whispered, stepping into the chamber, "are you all right?" Her eyes searched his face, filled with concern. Edward turned to her, his expression conflicted. "I don't know, Emma. I don't know anymore. The mirror, it showed me everything, the truth of Ravenwood and the darkness that binds us. As the days passed, Edward found himself trapped between two worlds, the world of light and the world of darkness. The mirror had given him the truth, but with it came a burden he hadn't anticipated. The shadows were not just a part of him, they were now a part of Ravenwood itself, and as long as he was its keeper, the cycle would continue. The more he tried to distance himself from the darkness, the more it crept into his life. Edward knew he couldn't escape. Not truly, but could he live with it? Could he continue his life, protecting Ravenwood and its people, knowing that the darkness would always be with him? Each night as he lay in bed, the whispers of the shadows grew louder, reminding him of the eternal choice he had made. The struggle between light and dark weighed heavily on Edward's soul. Every moment spent in the manor felt like a battle, a fight to maintain control over the shadows that threatened to consume him. Emma remained by his side, but even she could sense the growing distance between them. Edward was no longer the man she had known. He was the keeper now, bound to a fate neither of them could fully understand. One stormy night, as the winds howled outside, Edward found himself drawn to the heart of the manor once again. The shadows seemed to move with purpose, guiding him to the ancient altar where it had all begun. There he found the old scrolls, the ones that had once bound the first keeper to the darkness. Could he find a way to rewrite his fate? Could he free himself from the shadows forever? As Edward studied the ancient scrolls, the weight of his decision pressed heavily upon him. The shadows were not evil, they were balance. But could he continue to live with them, knowing that his role would never truly be over? The keeper was not just a guardian of the darkness, he was its master. And with that came a responsibility far greater than any he had ever imagined. With a heavy heart, Edward made his decision. The balance of Ravenwood would remain intact, but the darkness would no longer rule him. He would be the keeper, but he would not let the shadows consume him. Ravenwood's fate was sealed, and Edward had accepted his role. But he had also chosen to live, to embrace the light within him. The shadows would always be a part of him, but they would never define him. As Edward stood before the altar, the ancient scrolls in his hands, the shadows seemed to breathe with him. He had made his choice. The darkness would no longer control him, but neither would he abandon his duty. Ravenwood Manor needed him, and so did the shadows. They were not enemies, they were forces of nature, neither good nor evil, but part of the world's delicate balance. Edward had come to understand that he wasn't their master. He was their guardian. The wind outside howled louder, as if Ravenwood itself was aware of his decision. Edward folded the scrolls carefully and placed them back in their resting place. He would not destroy what had been part of Ravenwood's history for centuries, but he would ensure that the shadows would never again claim control over him. The dawn would come with clarity, a new beginning for both the manor and its keeper. As the days passed, Edward found that the shadows no longer lurked in the corners of his mind, waiting to take over. They were there, but they no longer held the same power over him. It was as if they had accepted his role, recognizing him as their keeper, their protector. The whispers that had once been filled with chaos were now calm and guiding, like the soft hum of the wind through the trees. But even as the darkness seemed to retreat, there was an underlying sense of caution. Edward knew that this peace was fragile. The shadows had been with him for so long, and although they had accepted him, there was always the possibility of rebellion. He would have to remain vigilant, always aware of the balance that could easily tip. Despite the calm that had settled over Ravenwood Manor, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. She watched Edward closely, seeing the toll his journey had taken on him. He was no longer the man he had once been, and though he seemed more at peace, Emma feared that the shadows still held a piece of his soul. She had always supported him, but now she wondered if he was truly free or if he was simply fooling himself. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Emma looked at him with concern. "Edward, do you ever wonder if you've made the right choice? If the shadows are still a part of you even now?" Edward looked at her, his eyes soft but filled with the weight of what he had endured. I've made peace with them, Emma, the shadows and I. We have come to an understanding, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying. Even to himself. It was on a moonless night that Edward first sensed it. The shadows, once calm, began to stir once again. At first, it was subtle, just a flicker at the edge of his vision, a soft whisper in the dark corners of his mind. But as the hours passed, it grew stronger, more insistent. The darkness was returning, not as an enemy, but as a force that demanded attention. Edward knew that he would have to face it once more. He had made his peace, but the shadows had not forgotten their power. They were testing him, pushing him to see if he was truly in control. He walked through the manor, his steps heavy with the weight of what he knew was coming. The shadows were not just a part of him, they were a part of Ravenwood, and they would never fully leave. As Edward entered the heart of Ravenwood Manor, the shadows surged, swirling around him in a whirlwind of dark energy. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, and let the darkness surround him. He could feel it, the power, the weight of the shadows pressing against him. This was his test, the moment where he would prove whether he had truly become the keeper. The darkness seemed to challenge him, pushing him to his limits, testing his resolve. But Edward stood firm. He was no longer afraid. He had come to understand the shadows, and he would not let them consume him again. With every breath, he pushed back, asserting his control. The shadows recoiled, as if sensing his strength. This time, they would not claim him. But the shadows were not done with him yet. As Edward stood at the heart of Ravenwood, surrounded by the swirling darkness, he felt a presence, a figure emerging from the depths of the shadows. It was not the whispering darkness he had known. This was something different, something more ancient. The figure was tall, its form shrouded in a cloak of pure shadow. Its eyes gleamed like burning embers, and its voice was a deep rumble, like the growl of an animal. You have done well, Keeper, the figure said, its voice both familiar and foreign. But the true test is not your ability to control the shadows. Thank you for joining us on this magical journey. We hope this story helped you drift off into the sweetest of dreams. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more bedtime adventures. Remember, the best stories are the ones that guide us to a peaceful rest. Sleep tight, and we'll see you in the next dream-filled episode. Good night.